The year's 1470. In the highlands of Thessaly, a bell tolls one more time over a valley that will never hear it again. Inside the Convent of St. Catherine, 23 ladies kneel in prayer. Their lips move in tandem, creating sentences they've said every morning for years. But this morning, the words taste different. Like ash, like farewell. Outside the stone walls, the horizon bleeds crimson. Not from mourning, but from the flags of an empire that has already devoured kingdoms whole. The Ottoman army doesn't march. It runs like a torrent of steel and fire, destroying everything in its path. Sister Alani, the abbess, holds a silver crucifix that has lasted 3 generations. Her hands shake, but not from terror. She knows what's coming. They all do. What they don't know, what no one could conceive, is that death would have been a kindness. Because what occurred next wasn't documented in any history book you read in school. It was buried, obliterated, concealed behind decades of quiet until now. What the Ottomans did to these women wasn't simply conquering. It was something considerably more premeditated. Something that historians are just now starting to unearth. The issue isn't whether you can handle the truth. It's whether you're willing to remember it. If you've ever wondered why some tales disappear from history while others are recounted again and again, you're in the correct spot. Here on Crimson Historians, we dive into the archives the world forgot. Missionary letters, Ottoman state archives, testimony buried in Vatican vaults. Every view, every like, every subscription helps us draw one more voice out of the darkness. Now, let's go back to the convent since the bell has stopped ringing and the doors are going to shatter. To comprehend what happened to these nuns, you need to understand the machine that swallowed them. 17 years ago in 1453, Constantinople had fallen. The gem of Christendom, the city that had stood for almost 1,000 years, gone in 53 days. Of cannon fire and murder. The Hagia Sophia, once the largest church in the world, was stripped of its crosses within hours of the capture. Its mosaics were patched over. Its bells melted down. Within a week, the call to prayer boomed from its domes, where anthems had sung for 9 centuries. Sultan Mehmed II stood in the nave of a historic church and proclaimed it a mosque. Not because he needed another place of worship, because he realized something most conquerors don't. You don't defeat a people by murdering them. You vanquish them by deleting who they were. The Ottomans didn't merely conquer territory. They won identity. When Mehmed glanced west toward the dispersed relics of the Byzantine realm, he saw wounds that refused to heal. Every church bell that still sounded, every monastery that still remained, every cross throwing shadows over captured territory. These were pronouncements, acts of defiance, evidence that the old world refused to die. And every nun who still prayed in Latin was a live reminder that religion could survive armies. So the Sultan made a choice. If they will not convert, they will vanish. Not through massacre. Massacre makes martyrs. Martyrs encourage resistance. Songs are written. Stories are recounted. The dead become immortal. The Ottomans had created something considerably more exquisite. Something that left no music, no tales, no remembrance. Erasure. By 1470, this method had been tried throughout the empire. Greek monasteries. In Maria, Serbian convents in the Balkans, Armenian churches in Anatolia. They didn't burn them all. They converted some, abandoned others. But the pattern was always the same. First came the offer. Then came the quiet. The Convent of St. Catherine, located on a mountainside in Thessaly, distant from any garrison or ally, was about to become another test case, another footnote in an empire's growth. But these ladies didn't realize they were footnotes. These weren't fighters. They were ladies who had spent their whole lives in quiet and prayer. Their weapons were rosaries. Their armor was faith. Most of them had never seen a military, never wielded a sword, never believed they would need to. Sister Elelin has been abbey for 12 years. Before that, she visited the sick in a community that no longer existed, devoured by disease in 1448. She came to the convent not to escape the world, but to make sense of it. Sister Magdalena was 19. She had taken her vows barely 2 years previously. Her hands still carried the calices from her father's farm. She entered the convent after her family was slain in a raid. The convent was the only place she had felt secure since. Sister Theodorus was 70. She had outlived 2 abbesses, an emperor, and more battles than she could count. She had ceased dreading death decades ago, but none of them had ever encountered this. If this point in history doesn't motivate you to study more, you could be missing the lesson our forefathers died to teach. That the most dangerous thing you can do in the face of authority is refusing to forget who you are. Now, let's witness what occurs when faith meets empire. The first cannonball strikes soon after daybreak. It doesn't hit the chapel. It hits the bell. Tower, dart. The sound is apocalyptic. Stone bursts into the air. Iron shrieks against iron. The bell that has rung every morning for 140 years shatters mid-swing, and the shards shower down into the courtyard where the sisters gather herbs for healing. The same hands who nurtured those plants now cover their ears, frightened. Sister Elelin doesn't scream. She rises, crucifix hoisted high, and starts to sing, the Kyrie Elas, Lord have compassion. One by one, the others join her, 23 voices rising, against the clamor of an empire. But empires don't listen to tunes. By lunchtime, the gates are breached. Ottoman troops swarm into the courtyard, not with swords drawn, with ledges, quills, inkpots. They go about the convent like clerks, not invaders, counting, recording, classifying. Because to the Ottomans, these women aren't persons, they're possessions. A translator walks forward, a Greek guy who previously resided on these highlands. His voice shakes as he reads from a scroll. And then, you can sense the humiliation buried in every syllable. By edict of Sultan Mehmed II, the subjects of the conquered provinces must submit to the authority of the Sultan. Those who convert will be provided protection. Those who resist will suffer the repercussions of rebellion. Sister Eleni moves ahead. Her expression is calm, even tranquil. She talks not to the troops, but to the translator in Greek so clear that everyone understands. Tell your Sultan that we have already dedicated our lives to a king. We have nothing left to surrender. The commander in charge, a guy called Hassan Pasha, whose name appears in Ottoman military records from the 1470 Athelian War, doesn't reply with rage. He reacts with something considerably more horrifying, a grin, since he knows something the nuns don't yet grasp. The Ottomans have mastered the technique of breaking people without killing them. That night, the ladies are trapped within their own church. No food, no drink, only darkness and the sound of troops outside, laughing, eating, living, as they wait to see who breaks first. 2 sisters, younger ones from Corinth, begin to mourn in the corner. Their tears resound off the stone walls. But Sister Magdalena, barely 20 years old, starts to murmur a psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I will not want. Then another. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no harm. Then another. And eventually, the sobbing stops. This is the time the Ottomans misjudged. Then, These ladies had spent their whole lives preparing for misery. Fasting, vigils in the cold, hours of quiet obedience to something bigger than themselves. What the troops perceived as torture, the nuns saw as their regular discipline. But Hasan Pasha is patient. He has seen this before. In Maria, in Wakia, among the remains of Serbian monasteries where monks hoped their religion would rescue them. Faith is like a light, he once remarked in a letter to the Sultan, now kept in the Topkapi Palace archives. It shines brightest just before it dies. He's going to test that notion. On the second day, the doors open. A servant arrives bringing bread and drink. Genuine food, pure water. He lays it down without a word and goes. The nuns gaze at it. Their throats are dry, their stomachs hollow. The younger sisters glance at Ilani, despair in their eyes. Sister Theodorus, the oldest, speaks first. They want us to accept it, to feel thanks, to soften. Elaine nods. Then we, Faustat. They don't touch the meal. By the third day their lips are cracked and bleeding. Their hands tremble. The youngest sisters can barely stand, yet they don't break. Hasan Pasha looks from the courtyard, arms crossed. He's amazed, furious, and maybe just for a minute, something close to respect flickers over his features. But respect doesn't alter tactics. On the third day, the doors open again. This time, it's not a servant. It's Hasan himself. He talks in Turkish, and the translator trails after him like a shadow. You are not criminals. You are not enemies. You are just wrong. The Sultan is compassionate. He gives you new lives, new identities, safety. All you gotta do is pronounce the words. Silence. Or you can come with us to Constantinople. There, the Sultan himself will hear your case. Perhaps he will be touched by your conviction. He stops, allows the words sink, but the trip is long, and the weak do not endure it. It's not a threat, it's a promise. Sister Alelin stares at her sisters. Some are barely aware. Some are praying with their eyes closed. Some are looking at the floor, attempting to find strength in the stone. She turns back to Hasan. We shall stroll. The grin returns to his face. Good, Boilod. We depart at daybreak. That night, the nuns clutch each other in the darkness. No one speaks, but Sister Magdalena starts to hum a hymn they sung during Vespers. One by one, the others join her. Outside, the troops hear it. Some of them pause. Some of them glance away. One of them, years later, would tell his grandson about the ladies who sung themselves to death. But that narrative will be forgotten too. For now, the song rises through the holes in the church walls and floats out into the darkness. A prayer, a plea, a proclamation. We are still here. They depart at daybreak on the fourth day. 23 ladies, wrists tied with rope, marching south toward the shore. No carts, no horses, just their feet and the dust and the sun that offers no compassion. The troops don't rush them. They don't need to. The route itself is the penalty. By the second day, Sister Irene falls. She's 62. Her knees had been weakening for years. She attempts to rise, but her legs won't support her. The troops don't wait. Sister Magdalena and another nun, Sister Anna, pick her between them and carry her for the remaining 3 kilometers. When they eventually halt for the night, Irene is comatose. By daybreak, she's gone. They bury her on the wayside with their hands. No tools, no ceremony. Just soil and mumbled prayers. The troops observe, but they don't stop them. Hasan Pasha writes a note in his ledger. 22 remaining. On the fourth day, it occurs again. Sister Callista, who hasn't spoken since the siege, just stops walking. She sits down in the middle of the road, shuts her eyes, and doesn't get up. They leave her there. By the time they reach the port of Volos 7 days later, just 18 survive. But something occurred on that road. Anything the Ottomans didn't foresee. The nuns stopped sobbing, stopped pleading. They strolled in quiet. But that wasn't the stillness of defeat. It was the stillness of ladies who had already made their decision. Sister Eleni had been strolling at the head of the line, guiding them even with her hands chained. But on the morning of the 7th day, Hassan Pasha calls for her. She's taken to his tent alone. What occurs next isn't mentioned in Ottoman documents. It's detailed in a letter from a Venetian merchant who observed the aftermath. A letter found in 2003 in the archives of Drovnik. He writes, "I saw them bring her back at dawn. She could not walk. Her eyes, God forgive me. Her eyes were open, but she was not inside them anymore. They dressed her in silk and paraded her through the camp as a convert. But when I passed close, I heard her lips moving. She was still praying in Latin, silently. She had not broken. They had simply taken her body and left her soul to wander." This is the Ottoman strategy that history doesn't teach you. They didn't want martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. Songs are written, stories are told, the dead become saints. They wanted ghosts. Women who would walk, talk, eat, breathe, but would never be whole again. Living, proof that rebellion was futile. Living warnings to anyone who thought faith could stand against empire. Sister Elelen walked with them the rest of the way to the coast, but she never spoke again, never looked anyone in the eye. She was there, but she wasn't. The younger sisters wept when they saw her. The older ones just prayed harder. At the port of Volos, they're loaded onto a galley, a massive warship with rows of benches and chains bolted to the wood. This is not a passenger ship. This is a vessel designed for control. Slaves, prisoners, cargo, ... The nuns are chained to the benches, wrists locked to iron rings. A ship's manifest discovered in 1987 in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Museum lists them not by name, but by number. Religious. Captives, female 18. Destination, imperial household, purpose, domestic service, and conversion. That word service is doing a lot of work. The voyage lasts 12 days. The seas, not kind. Storms lash the deck. Salt spray stings their cracked lips. The ship pitches and rolls. And the women who have never seen the ocean vomit until there's nothing left. At night, the youngest, Sister Magdalena, whispers psalms beneath her breath. Her voice is faint, barely audible over the crashing waves. But the other, prisoners, Greeks, Serbs, Italians, men and women chained beside them, turn their heads to listen. For a moment, the sea seems to still. When the ship finally enters the Bosphorus, the sisters see the skyline of Constantinople rise before them. Domes, minarets, walls that seem to stretch forever. The city gleams in the dawn light like a blade. For centuries it had been called the city of the world's desire. Now it would become their cage. From the docks their march through narrow streets lined with merchants, soldiers, and slaves. People stop to stare. Christian nuns among the captives are a rarity, even in an empire built on conquest. This is unusual. They're led past the ancient walls, through the imperial district, past gardens where fountains sing and peacocks scream. And then in the shadow of Hagia Sophia, the great church that is now a mosque, they're forced to stop, to kneel. As the call to prayer echoes from the minarets, one of the sisters whispers, "Home, but it is no longer ours." They're taken to the palace, but not to the grand halls, not to the courtyards where ambassadors walk and vassals conspire. They're taken beneath down stone steps that spiral into darkness, through tunnels that smell of damp and decay, to a place that doesn't officially exist. If you're still watching, it's because part of you knows this story needs to be told. Subscribe to Crimson Historians. Not for us, but for them. For the voices that were swallowed by silence. Now let's follow them into the dark. Beneath Topkapi Palace, there's a network of tunnels that tourists never see. Storage rooms, servant quarters, forgotten corridors that wind through the bedrock like veins. And in the farthest corner, sealed off, for centuries, a room with no official purpose. In 2011, during restoration work, archaeologists broke through a false wall. What they found stopped them cold. Scratched into the stone, barely visible, were crosses, dozens of them. Small, crude, carved with fingernails or shards of broken pottery. And beneath those crosses, etched in Latin, 4 words, Lux in Tenebris, Lucet. The light shines in the darkness. This was their chapel. For months, maybe years, these women lived beneath the palace, working as silent servants by day, scrubbing floors, washing linens, tending fires for rooms they would never enter. But at night, when the palace slept, they gathered in this forgotten room and prayed. They had no priest, no altar, no Bible, just memory. They recited psalms from recall, verses half forgotten, reshaped into prayers that kept them alive. They sang hymns in whispers so faint the stone barely caught them. They held communion with bread stolen from the kitchens and water from the palace wells. And they carved their faith into stone, one scratch at a time, knowing no one would ever see it. Sister Magdalena was among them, the girl who had whispered psalms on the ship, who had carried Sister Irene on the road, who had refused to look away when they brought Sister Elani back in silk. She became their voice in the dark. The archaeologists found her mark, too. A small bird scratched into the corner of the wall. Beside it, 23 lines, one for each sister. But only 11 lines were complete. The rest trailed off into nothing. They used broken pottery for candle holders, a scrap of linen for an altar cloth. From a shard of a shattered mirror, they fashioned a crude cross. In this secret chapel, they gathered each night after the palace slept. No hymns, no sermons, only whispers. Each woman knelt and shared a memory. Her home, her church bell, the warmth of bread before dawn. These memories became their new psalms, small offerings to a God who still listened. In the dark, a Venetian prisoner held in the palace for ransom in 1478 wrote of strange voices echoing beneath the harem. Women singing in Latin to a God not of this empire. For centuries, historians dismissed it as superstition until they found the chapel. But here's what breaks your heart. The crosses stop. Halfway through the wall, the scratches become erratic, desperate. The lines deepen as if carved with more force, more urgency. Then nothing. Ottoman records from 1482 mention a cleansing of the palace staff under the new sultan. Anyone deemed unproductive or resistant was removed. No details, no names, no burial sites. Just one line in a ledger written in neat Ottoman script. Disposed. The Nuns of St. Catherine vanished from history. 18 women who had walked 7 days through hell, who had crossed the sea in chains, who had carved prayers into stone in the dark, gone, but their chapel remained. A French diplomat in 1712 wrote about a rumor among the older palace servants that certain nights, if you stood in the lower halls, the air would grow cold, and if you listened closely, you could hear women singing in Latin. He dismissed it as superstition, the foolish beliefs of uneducated servants. But the walls don't lie. In 2011, when the archaeologists examined the chapel more closely, they found something else. Traces of wax, not from Ottoman candles, but from a different source, older, mixed with herbs, the kind of candles nuns made in convents. Which means they kept their vigil for longer than anyone thought possible. Months, maybe years, carving crosses, whispering prayers, refusing to disappear. Sister Magdalena's bird was the last mark on the wall. Beside it, scratched so faintly it almost wasn't there. 2 words in Greek, we endure. But the truth is, they didn't just endure. They left something behind that empires couldn't erase. A room full of crosses, a prayer carved in stone, proof that faith could survive where walls and chains could not. The Ottoman Empire lasted until 1922, 600 years of conquest and power. But in the end, it was those scratches on the wall that survived. Not the Sultan's decrees, not Hassan Pashar's ledgers, not the silk they dressed Sister Alani in. Just 4 Latin words carved by women the world forgot. Lux in tenebris lucer. The light shines in the darkness. So why does this story matter? Because it's not about religion. It's not even about the Ottomans. It's about what power does when it tries to erase people and what happens when those people refuse to disappear. The Ottoman Empire lasted 600 years. They conquered 3 continents. They rewrote maps, languages, entire cultures. They turned the greatest cathedral in Christendom into a mosque. They ruled from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia. But they couldn't erase 18 women who scratched prayers into stone. Think about that. An empire with armies, cannons, endless resources, and the will to reshape the world against women with women. Nothing but fingernails and faith. And the women won not in the way empires measure victory. They didn't reclaim their convent. They didn't convert their captives. They didn't live to see freedom. But they left a mark. History is written by the victors. But memory is written by the survivors. And sometimes survival looks like a cross carved in the dark, where no one was supposed to see it. A prayer whispered in a language the conquerors tried to silence. A bird scratched into stone. To remember the sisters who fell. Centuries later we found it anyway. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." These women lived forward into darkness. They walked 7 days, knowing they might not survive. They crossed the sea in chains, knowing what waited on the other side. They descended into tunnels beneath a palace, knowing they might never see sunlight again. But they carved their prayers anyway, trusting that someone someday would look backward and find them. You just did. In 2011, when the archaeologists stood in that hidden chapel staring at those crosses, one of them asked a question that haunts me. How long did they keep the vigil? The wax traces suggest years. The depth of some carvings suggests desperate, repeated effort, which means these women gathered night after night, year after year in absolute darkness, and refused to stop believing. Even when sisters disappeared, even when the scratches on the wall stopped growing, even when hope should have died, they kept carving. That's not just faith. That's defiance in its purest form. The Ottoman Empire is gone now, dissolved in 1922. Its sultans are dust. Its armies are memory. The palace still stands, but it's a museum now. Tourists walk its halls taking photographs, unaware of what lies beneath their feet. But those crosses remain. And that Latin phrase, barely visible after 500 years, still speaks. Lux in tenebris. Lucet. The light shines in the darkness. It's from the Gospel of John. A verse about light that cannot be extinguished. About truth that survives even when everything else is taken away. Sister Magdalena carved those words knowing she would never leave that palace, knowing her name would be forgotten, knowing the world would move on without her. But she carved them anyway, because she understood something that empires never do. You can conquer land. You can rewrite history. You can erase names from ledgers and bury bodies in unmarked graves. But you cannot kill what people carry inside them, and you cannot silence what they carve into stone. You've just witnessed one of history's darkest truths. If stories like this remind you how fragile humanity is, how easily voices can be erased, then subscribe to Crimson Historians and keep the past alive. Because some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced centuries ago, especially then. The nuns of St. Catherine were meant to disappear. That was the plan. Erase them, break them, turn them into ghosts or converts or footnotes in Ottoman ledgers. But they didn't disappear. They're still here in those crosses in that Latin phrase in the chapel that archaeologists found 500 years later. And now they're here with you because you listened, because you remembered, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Lux inter bris, Lucet. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome